There's a tightness you carry in your chest that you can never quite name. It shows up at dinner tables when someone asks how your day was, and your throat locks before you can even answer. It shows up at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet. Your ribcage feels like it's slowly collapsing inward for no reason you can identify. You've checked your heart, you've checked your lungs, nothing is wrong with you medically. Yet your body keeps behaving as though something catastrophic already happened. A long time ago, in a room you can barely remember. Picture this. Someone close to you turns to you during a hard moment, maybe a partner or a friend, and they ask a simple question. What do you need right now? And your mind goes completely blank. Not because you don't care, not because nothing hurts, but because somewhere deep inside you were never given the language. The part of you that should know the answer was never taught the words. You stand there with your mouth half open and a strange pressure behind your eyes. And you just feel like a complete fraud. Because how do you explain that you genuinely don't know what you feel? The signals your body sends you arrive completely scrambled, like letters from a language no one ever taught you to read. It started in a room where a child reached out, maybe not with words, maybe just with a look, a shift in posture, or a small noise. A noise that meant I need you to see me right now. And nothing came back. No hand on the shoulder. No voice saying you seem upset. Tell me what happened. Just silence. And that silence didn't just happen once. It happened hundreds of times, thousands, until the child stopped reaching altogether. Not because they stopped needing, but because they learned that needing was the problem. Clinicians have a name for what this produces. They call it alexithymia, a genuine difficulty identifying and describing your own emotions. And here is where I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to describe is going to sound uncomfortably specific. You know that moment when someone tells you they love you genuinely. No games, no conditions, and instead of warmth, your chest tightens. Something in you pulls back like a hand jerking away from a hot surface. You might smile, you might even say it back. But underneath, there's this low hum of wrongness, almost like the kindness itself is the actual threat. You've probably never told anyone that, you might not have even told yourself, but you have definitely felt it. That creeping suspicion that the affection is only temporary, that the ground beneath it is already shifting. And the smartest thing you can do is stop leaning on it before it disappears. That's not a personality flaw, that's an adaptation that was once keeping you alive. Clinicians describe patients walking in not with a dramatic crisis, but with something much harder to pin down. A persistent flatness, a sense that everyone around them is tuned into some emotional frequency, a frequency they just cannot find on the dial. Life experience slightly behind glass, present but never quite touching it. And relationships become the sharpest mirror of all. Someone stays consistently, without ever disappearing. And instead of relief, you feel something closer to suffocation. Not because you don't want closeness, but because closeness taught you to brace first. If love was unpredictable in the room where you first learned about it, then of course you stopped counting on it. Of course you built a version of yourself that handles everything alone. A version that needs nothing from anyone, looking completely fine from every angle. That version got you through, but it also locked something away. And what it locked away didn't simply vanish just because you stopped looking. So let's pull this apart, because the mechanics of what happened deserve precision. You're an adult now who flinches at vulnerability, who overfunctions in every room, who keeps score of how much space you're allowed to take up. The reason you do all of that traces back to a single engineering principle, a principle that got installed before you had any say in it. The environment made a demand, and the demand was to need less. And you, brilliant and desperate and small, complied. Think about what that actually required of a child. The kid who went silent didn't just go silent. They ran an internal cost-benefit analysis every time they opened their mouth and concluded that the risk of being ignored outweighed the chance of being heard. The one who became the family comedian figured it out on a molecular level. That laughter was the only currency the room would accept. Some buried themselves in schoolwork, becoming incredibly competent, so competent that no adult ever had to worry about them. Others became the caretaker, parenting the people who were supposed to parent them, absorbing everyone else's emotional weight so the household could stay standing. None of that was dysfunction. Every single one of those moves was precise. A well-engineered answer to a specific failure in the environment around them. The failure belonged to the room, not to the sound. A recent review across 25 studies confirmed what your body has known for decades. Children who lived through emotional neglect carry measurable difficulty regulating their emotions into adulthood. Those needs you buried didn't dissolve. They just stopped making noise, because noise never brought anyone closer. The desire for connection went underground, not because it was weak, but because expressing it had become genuinely unsafe. Now something shifts. Someone says something genuinely kind to you, And your reflex is to deflect, laugh it off, change the subject. You catch yourself mid-flinch, you pause. You ask yourself a question nobody in that original room ever taught you. Why did I just do that? What was I protecting myself from? That tiny pause, that half second of curiosity directed inward, is not small. It's a radical act for a nervous system trained to treat its signals as noise. And the hardest protocol of all, you begin to grieve something with no photograph, no crime scene, and no specific date. You grieve the absence, the birthday no one remembered with any feeling behind it, the hour you cried in your room and no footsteps ever came down the hallway. You aren't mourning a thing that was done to you. You are mourning a thing that never arrived. That's a strange and disorienting kind of grief, and it moves slowly, and it doesn't resolve in a single evening of tears. It resolves with persistence, usually with help, and always with the decision, made quietly and repeated often, that your experience deserves to be taken seriously, starting with you. Because the brain you're carrying right now is remarkably capable of rewiring, even after decades of silence. The walls aren't permanent, they just feel that way, because no one ever told you there was a door. So here is where you actually stand right now. Not where you stood at 5, not where you stood at 15, but right now, reading the room of your own body. For what might be the first time without flinching, you noticed something tonight. Maybe it was a single sentence that landed somewhere between your ribs and refused to move. Maybe it was the quiet shock of realizing the emptiness you've been dragging. Through every relationship, every job, every 3 a.m. spiral actually has architecture. It was built, which means it can be unbuilt. But I'm not going to tell you that awareness alone saves you. It doesn't. Knowing the name of the thing that hollowed you out doesn't fill the space back in. What it does is something far more precise. It hands you the difference between reacting and choosing, between flinching away from someone's warmth because your whole system screams that warmth is a setup, and pausing long enough to ask yourself whether that scream belongs to the present or to a kitchen table 20 years ago where no one looked up. That pause isn't healing. It's the first brick of a room that actually echoes back. You build it by doing something almost unbearably small. You check in with yourself, not to fix anything, but to witness it. You were never broken. You were just living in a room that absorbed everything you put out and gave nothing back. The room was the problem. It was always the room. And you don't live there anymore unless you keep choosing to.